You're listening to an Olive Pit production. Welcome to the show. I'll be your host. Let's get to it. Welcome back to another show of Look for the Helpers, back with Dr. Nicole Navega. Thank you for coming back. And today we've got a special guest, Michael Cunningham.
Hello.
Woo, yay. Michael is joining us. He is a local first responder here in Lee County, and I hear he's got tons of knowledge, first responder knowledge. He's been everywhere and done everything. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
That sounds like a song. He's been everywhere.
Country song, though, I hope.
Well, I've done a little bit of everything. I've been around EMS for about 29 years next month. So small agencies, large agencies. Did a little bit of the rescue side as well. I've been down here for about 5 years. So, yeah.
So in 29 years, EMS, yes. Any fire? No. So all EMS.
All EMS and rescue.
What was your favorite place to work, like state?
I spent most of my time in West Virginia, and there's different areas of the state. It almost feels like different states, different locations. The southern part of the state, I get to do a lot of rescue stuff, water rescue, ropes, and things like that the fire guys do here. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is fun. Any high angle rescue?
Yes, we did high angle rescue, water rescue, wilderness search and rescue. Got to teach a little bit of that. It's good times.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Throughout your time in West Virginia, unofficially, any moonshine?
Unofficially, of course not.
Perfect answer.
Never. Absolutely not.
Well, that's great. I had no idea. I've worked with you for several years now, and had no idea you had such an interesting background in EMS. So that's very cool.
Yeah, it's good times.
Nicole has a question for you. For both of us, apparently.
Okay, so my icebreaker question is, if you had to have someone play you in a movie about the story of your life, who's playing you?
Oh, wow.
Talk into that mic. Pull that mic closer, Mike.
Get friendly with that, Mike.
Friendly with it,
Mike.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a strange question. It'd probably have to be a comedian.
All right.
Definitely have to be
Who
a
are your
comedian.
favorites?
Would
you feel like he
would
you feel like he would have to look like you to play you? He has to.
I don't know. There's probably not a lot of famous people look this bad.
Stop it. All right, I'm going to give you some time to think about it, and we'll come back to that.
We'll revisit that.
So I
Mr.
actually,
Olive.
if I had thought about this, I knew she was going to ask.
You
this.
did?
Because I think we've talked about this.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
Yeah. And because I already have an answer, and that's how I know we've talked about this.
All right.
But so for whatever reason, and maybe I just dreamt it, I don't know.
Okay.
But this question has come up, and I've thought about it, and all I can think of is
Now you forgot.
What's his name? As soon as I can describe him, and you guys would know his name, but then I'd feel like an idiot for not knowing his name. Man.
Dead air.
I'll tell you this, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He lived in a van.
Down by the river?
Down by the river.
Oh, Chris Farley.
Chris Farley. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good one.
I feel like I can relate to Chris Farley a little bit.
Well, I don't want to bring the spirit of this down, but he's no longer living. So
well, he
would not be able to
you
play
said
you.
any. You said any. You didn't say any living.
All right, I was not specific. All right.
Yeah, you didn't say any
All right,
living.
I'll have to be more specific next time. Any thoughts about someone who's living who could actually play you?
No.
No, you got nothing.
No, I got nothing. I just think Chris Farley. Like I can, fat guy in a little coat. Like I mean, come on.
He is awesome, but that wouldn't work.
No, it wouldn't work.
All right, we're gonna have to regroup on this one next time.
Yeah, and I don't have a question this time, but I'll come up with a new question one that's not. Actually, you know what, Mike? I'm going to give you my question.
Okay.
All right.
I refuse to answer, so he won't give it to me.
She's already answered. I already know. So my question was, funky chicken, or what was the other one?
Oh my God. You're hilarious. A hokey pokey.
Funky chicken or hokey pokey?
Probably have to be the funky chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Be the funky chicken.
Do you have a reason?
No.
You don't
I
have
just hate the hokey pokey.
Okay, that's good enough. That's a reason. Okay.
Yeah. Well, no. So the way I look at it is the funky chicken. Like, if you're doing the funky chicken, you've got a personality, like a certain type of personality. Not anybody's going out there and just doing the funky chicken, right?
That's true. That's true.
True.
Anybody can do the hokey pokey.
Yeah.
It's true.
So that's where I kind of come from with
All
my
right.
question.
That's your okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm boring
Neither.
because
Still.
I'm done. Yeah. Neither. I'm doing
All right.
neither.
All right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, I think the biggest thing about what we're trying to achieve here with Look for the Helpers is, getting rid of the stigma of, it's not okay to talk. It's, you've been in EMS for 29 years. Congratulations. But I'm sure you can remember a time when, it's like Nicole has stated before, just rub a little dirt in it. You'll be fine,
Absolutely.
and it was not okay to talk about our feelings and how we're feeling and how that call affected us or how this call affected us. And I think what our ultimate goal is just try to get everybody to realize that it is okay. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to, find somebody, whether it's your partner, your spouse, a friend, a coworker, whatever it is, and talk. Because what's most important is that we all are able to continue to do our job. Or, if you get to the point where you just find that this is, it's time to move on to something else, then you need to be able to recognize that and not feel stuck. And just know that it's okay to talk and it's okay to get your feelings out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in that suck it up, rub some dirt on it kind of mindset. And you didn't even pay attention. If somebody was having a little moment, you just kind of gave them some space and just ignored them.
Right.
And I think back of things when people probably were trying to reach out and just completely got missed. I have my best friend, when I started this 1 year in, died. And I feel like maybe if I would have responded the right way when he reached out hours before, that he would still be here. But because of the way we were taught, never even really picked up on the signs.
Right.
And so it's just one of those things you have to be paying attention,
And what an awful experience for anybody to go through. But I imagine that this traumatic experience that you had with this event probably sparked this passion in you to take care of people and listen to people and want to be, a helping peer.
Yeah, and in the environment that I grew up in, it was all the emergency services were basically family issues. You grew up in it, your family was in it, and that's the direction you took. And nobody in my family was in any kind of emergency services. My best friend kind of got me into it and drug me in, kind of kicking and screaming initially. And then especially after that, that happened, I don't have a choice. I have to seek out the busier areas, do as much as you can for as many people and try to pay attention,
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that's a tough one.
Yeah. How many years ago was that?
28.
28. So
Yeah, it was literally 1 year.
literally.
1 year in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I talked to him at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and he needed to talk, but I had to get to work at midnight, and he was on duty. So I'm like, yeah, I'll catch you tomorrow. No big deal. And then I got a call at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So it was it was one of those things that was so hard to accept that we initially for many years were like, he didn't do that. Something else happened.
Right.
It's taken a long time to just kind of realize that that's more than likely what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it took a lot of more seeing those personal tragedies through the years for different people to kind of accept that.
Right.
And I think I was just going to say, I mean, I know that we didn't necessarily plan to talk about suicide in particular today, but I think what you're saying right now, this idea that, you felt like, oh, if I had done something more, like maybe this would have happened. This wouldn't have happened, right? And I think, you're not alone in that experience. I feel like every time we hear about somebody who has killed themselves in the first responder community, particularly locally, just because we know some of them,
right.
Unfortunately, that's the thing that happens, right? People call me from out of the blue, and the thing that the common thread is always that. The common thread that people say is like, oh man, like, he called me last week and I didn't take his call, chit I just saw him 10 days ago and like I didn't really have the time to like chit chat with him or whatever, like whatever it is, some version of that thing, which is that could I have done something different, and I just want to say you're not alone in that, and to anybody else out there who's experienced that, I think that's the normal human reaction, and the hope is that neither you or the other people that it has happened to, that people get too stuck in that guilt, right?
Yeah.
Because guilt will eat you alive.
Right.
And so for whatever that's worth, that's the key, is like knowing that feeling's a normal feeling, and then sort of trying to just let it pass and realize that if people want to die, truly want to die, and they haven't gotten the help for it, they're going to do it. And you didn't.
Right.
Sometimes we can't get there. Sometimes we can't help, and it's not any of our fault, right?
Yeah. It's just little miscues. We get busy, and we just miss those little details.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very easy to miss.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm real sorry that happened again.
Yeah.
So since that was, that was obviously a pretty bad, which set you forward going into how you've started to do and since then.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you do to get through your days, pay a little bit extra attention? Can you tell us a little bit about that on the positive side, on how you've made some changes and like?
Yeah. On a personal level, you have to find something where I tell people I'm defragging my brain. For me, I hit the gym. Even after a bad shift, I hit the gym for some period of time. It's a little odd for me, and I have to be alone. So I don't use public gyms. I can't do that. I have to be in a space of my own.
Right.
So you find what works for you. I'll do that. I'll build furniture. I'll do little things. You have to feel like you're being productive. Things are changing in a positive note. And I use, in the moment, a lot of times I'll just pick up different music. I know we talked about that. Mm-hmm. My phone, if somebody looked at my phone, there would all the music, different kinds of music. Like, oh, maybe he's got a problem. After that high priority call, and a lot of my partners have commented, they laugh because I'll put on like some, Sinatra or something like that, and just kind of, take a minute and just kind of, wind down before we go on.
So you save the death metal for the gym.
Absolutely.
That's not
absolutely.
that's not after calls. Okay.
Some little Dropkick Murphys or Metallica or something really angry for the gym. And honestly, that's what it is. I use that and I get angry and I just dump it in the gym and just leave it on the floor.
Yeah.
And that's really it.
But you also do another interesting thing, only because I know you and I know you do this, but talk a little bit about, like, you have a routine when you leave shift.
I do have a routine. I like a nice long ride home. I don't like to work close to my home. For one, I've done that and I don't like working on my neighbors. And I don't like to run into patients in the grocery store. But I like to have a nice, 35, 40, 45-minute ride home to just, sometimes it's just a ride home in silence to kind of, sort what just happened, for the day. And then immediately I'm like, go straight to the gym, and dump that out before I do anything else.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And, I totally agree. Like nobody, and some people actually do. Some people would prefer to work close to home just because, quick in, quick out, whatever. I don't like to work around my neighbors either, because you're going to see them.
Yes.
And, you don't always want to see them at their worst. And they don't always want you to see them at their worst. And that can get a little weird.
Yes. I've worked on neighbors. I've had family members, in my ambulance, and it's a very strange feeling, later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have another question for you about, and I'm just curious because I don't know the answer to this for you. What do you do? Because one of the challenges for first responders is this idea of, do I talk to my spouse about the horrendous call that I had, or do I keep that to myself? How do you feel about that? What's your opinion about that? How does it work?
It's probably an odd thing for me.
Yeah.
My wife is not in the medical field.
Right.
And that's great.
Yeah.
I have no idea what she does. When she tells me about her day, I'm like, that sounds horrible. I don't know what you just told me, but it sounds, I can tell by her emotions. It's pretty wound up.
Right.
And she's the same way. She actually did ride with me once to kind of get a feel for what happened.
That's right.
And it was a very odd day at a busy station. We didn't do anything until
that's
4 or
right.
5 o'clock in the evening. And then the one we ran back home, we have priority alerts that are priority 1, priority 2. Priority 1 would be our trauma alerts here. And it was a really ugly call. And so after the call, she's like, that's it, I'm done. I've seen enough. But she does, she watches me like a hawk. I tell people that, she saved my life twice. When she came along, I was going down a really ugly road, and she just turned me around just because of her personality. And several years ago, she noticed some cues where I was a little, way sideways, and I didn't realize it. And she said, we're going to get your head fixed. I'm like, oh, that sounds like
That's a nice way to put it.
Probably more than reasonable,
Right.
And so now she watches me. She'll be like, hey, back the overtime off. You're starting to get a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife actually does work in the field. We met in the ER, and she's since moved on, to easier shifts, which I don't
Thank
believe
God.
are actually easier because she, complains just as much.
Yeah.
But she only sees 3 or 4 patients a day now. But yeah, so, it is kind of easy to run through those things. But it's still different, it's still just a different aspect of how we see patients and how they see patients. They see patients after we've seen them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And while it's still difficult for them, they don't always get, the smells
Right.
of the house or the screaming or the dog or, all of that other stuff. So it still can be difficult.
Yeah. It's different.
It's different.
Not easier, just different.
Yeah.
Oh.
Any podcasts or book that you
No,
look for? The Helpers is one, right?
Yeah. Actually, I did actually start listening, and tuning in, with these. But that's about the extent of it. I find myself sometimes I pick up YouTube. A lot of times when I'm working out, I pick up YouTube, and sometimes some different types of podcasts and things will come on, and I'll kind of listen in. And sometimes when you see that stuff, you listen to this stuff. I kind of take it with a grain of salt. I always feel like there's an angle, with some of the professional speakers, and so I always think that first and foremost they're probably trying to help people. But it doesn't always feel applicable to my situations.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say, you worked my truck.
Yes.
And you left something behind, your lunchbox, your sandwich container, and a book.
I love that he
Yes.
says lunchbox,
Yeah,
like
my
you're
lunchbox,
6.
I do.
Like you're 6 years old.
I love to have one of the little metal ones.
I know.
Spider-Man or Batman?
You know what? Probably Scooby Doo.
Yeah, I would do Hot Wheels myself.
Oh, Scooby Doo. I think, absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be mine.
But you had the book with you.
I did.
And it was The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
You did?
I just started reading that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look at you bringing it around. I love it.
Yeah, and actually, because of that, I recently ordered it. I haven't started it yet, but
It's spreading again.
yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm a couple chapters in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty good.
I do want to make a few comments about this because anybody who's spent any time with me usually has heard that I'm telling them to read that book. And
I thought I'd bring it up for you this time.
Thank you. What I would say about the book is that it can feel heavy, right? I mean, it's written by a psychiatrist, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he has in some ways been one of a few people who has sort of changed the way that we think about stress and trauma. And essentially what he said is that, it's really not a psychological, he isn't saying those words, but I'm saying in those words, it's not really a psychological issue. It's an issue that is, within your autonomic nervous system, and that it's all of the stress and the trauma that you have experienced in your entire life is in your tissues. It's sitting there in your tissues. But he breaks it down, he gives us a history of trauma, all this other stuff. But sometimes I think what happens for people is, because I'm a believer that there isn't a person out there that hasn't experienced some sort of traumatic or knows someone, is close enough to someone who's experienced a traumatic event. Like I just don't buy it that there's anybody out there that hasn't. So I think what happens for people sometimes is that they start to read the book. I feel like I'm Italian right now. I'm going like this. I am, but my Italian's coming out. Sorry. That they read the book and they start to see themselves in the book, and then it can freak them out a little bit because they'll just be like, "Oh my gosh, like, oh, that's why I do that thing," because they start to learn about what a trauma response is. Right. And then they start to realize, oh, these are my trauma responses, and this is because of this event that happened to me in my life. And I think sometimes people feel like it's too heavy, I can't do it. And what I say to those people is just put it down, right? Just put it down and come back to it when you're feeling like you can come back to it, or skip that chapter, right? And just move on to the next chapter. And maybe at some point you can come back to it. Yeah. But it is 100% worth the read. It's everything that you need to know about trauma and how it impacts your body. And we really can't escape it in this work, right? I mean, this is an awesome segue into secondary traumatic stress.
I was just going to say, now that we've got this perfect segue to talk about something I had brought up before we started recording, was secondary traumatic stress.
Yeah. So we think of, we categorize trauma in two ways. The first way is primary trauma. And primary trauma it just means that poor Mike has sat through my whole presentation in NEOPS and he's heard all this before. But primary trauma is that your life is in danger, right? That there's a threat to your immediate threat to your life. So we typically think of that as in the first responder realm, it's much more like police officers. And you can argue anytime firefighters are running into fire, EMS folks less likely to have a primary trauma threat, right? There's not a lot of people out there trying to kill you on the road. You're the lifesaver.
It happens
in many ways, right? It happens. And so secondary trauma is the idea that you are just bearing witness to someone else's trauma. And so what I think is the most interesting piece about secondary trauma is that basically that's your job all day long, right? You're seeing everybody on their worst days. And what I find interesting about secondary trauma when I started to research it is that in the 70s, this professor named Dr. Charles Figley out of FSU, originally, he's now at Tulane, was really starting to just to research this, like, he's like the disaster trauma guru. Like, this is his term, secondary traumatic stress. And he basically started to research and talk to Vietnam vets when they came back. This is how long we've known about this stuff. So it's back in the 70s. And what he discovered at that time was that the children and the spouses of the Vietnam veteran who had PTSD were now showing symptoms of PTSD just by being in the house and being in the vicinity of him.
Okay.
And so what we've learned all these years later is that trauma gets unresolved trauma gets transmitted. And to me, that's the most important piece of this, is that if we don't figure out how to restore, recalibrate our bodies truly, first and foremost, like our central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, then we're at much higher risk to pass that trauma along to anybody who's in our vicinity, right?
So,
and that's kind of
causing the secondary trauma.
Yeah, right. And so you are like, and there's other areas of research called, intergenerational trauma, and they actually call it epigenetics. Like they're two. We don't have enough time to talk about those two concepts, but people are really, really looking at this. I mean, we know for sure that there's trauma in our DNA, and it's passed along through generations. So I think it's imperative, right, that we take it seriously.
Yeah.
So this whole like rub some dirt on it approach is it's not helping your family, right? You're just passing your stuff on to other people, even if you don't think that you are.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting how you explain it like that, and nobody wants the trauma that we have, right? But then we certainly don't want to pass it on, right? And so I think that's a good way to maybe get some recognition out there, like, hey, I don't want to pass this on to my wife, who is a banker, or a teacher, who could possibly make things worse, where she's at too, so
I want to tell one little quick story about this poignant story in this amazing book that you should also get, which, by the way, I'm not getting kickbacks from Bessel van der Kolk or Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, who wrote The Emotional Survival of Law Enforcement. And if I've talked about this already...
No, you've mentioned the
book, but I haven't told the story yet? Okay.
I don't think so.
You might need to do this for me to remind me what I've said and not said. But what I think is so poignant in that book is it's chapter 6. And he talks about this thing called the biological hypervigilant roller coaster. And the idea is that we have adrenaline, spikes and crashes and spikes and crashes and spikes and crashes. I've talked about that. But essentially what he says is that it's not your fault. It's your biology. You have to return to homeostasis after these long shifts, after the spikes and crashes, because your nervous system can't sustain it. So he tells this story about how this officer who would come home, and obviously they're a little bit different. They work 12 hours. You guys work 24. But the officer would come home. I feel like I did talk about this in here. You don't remember? You're not listening to me.
I don't remember.
Maybe I did. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I haven't. But he would talk about how he would just get in his lazy boy. And I know
you have not told this story.
I know Mike's heard it in NEOP. Yes. And he would get in his lazy boy, and he would just nobody home, glazed over eyes, families around him, and he's just completely disconnected, completely disengaged from the family. And he's just like clicking and clicking and clicking. He's not really watching anything. And I know people listening out there can relate to that. But this happens day after day, year after year, right? And so his kid grows up, his kid becomes a cop. This is the short version. And I so apologize, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, that I'm butchering your beautiful, eloquent chapter. But essentially, his kid grows up and wants to be a cop. And he finishes his field training time, and he shows up at briefing or roll call. And he comes in the back of the room, and his father's standing at the podium, and he's the, sergeant that night, and going to give the briefing, and all of the officers are surrounding him, and they are just laughing hysterically. He's holding court. He's super animated. He's completely engaged. And his son has this moment where he is just absolutely dumbfounded because he doesn't recognize that
Who
guy,
is this person?
right? And he's like, that is not even my father. I don't know him. I've never seen him, which is incredibly sad, right?
Yeah.
And he was obviously crushed to realize that the job got all of him and the family got a fraction of him, right?
Yeah.
Or a different version of him at least, right? Yeah. So I love that chapter. If you don't read any other part of the book, read chapter 6 of The Emotional Survival of Law Enforcement, because that is a very, very powerful chapter.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. And that's kind of what we're talking about is we don't think that we're passing the trauma down, right?
Right.
But that's a perfect example of like, he wouldn't know. He
Right.
wouldn't know what that impact is going to look like on his kid because he doesn't even realize it.
His son never knew him before, you know, and you know, if we've been in this job before we meet our spouse, you know, maybe that's all they've ever seen, right? Or significant other, and they've never really seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It is.
So one of the other things is we wanted to just touch on is EMDR. And I know that there's lots of stuff about EMDR. And I was actually talking with somebody about today's show, and they were super excited. She hadn't heard that we were doing this. She hadn't heard the show yet. And she's like, oh, pick me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on EMDR and then maybe, if not the next episode, definitely one of the upcoming episodes, if this person would like to come in, we can have her come in and share some experiences with EMDR, because I can tell you right now, she raves about it.
Yeah.
Swears that it has saved her life.
Yes. And as you say that, now I think I know who you're talking about. I didn't earlier, but now I think I know. Yeah. And there's so many people that say that about EMDR. There's a small handful that didn't have a great experience, and that's super unfortunate because most people have a really amazing experience. Basically, I mean, first of all, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the basic, in the most basic terms that I can put it, it uses your sort of natural information processing system. And we use something called bilateral stimulation to activate your REM state, right? That state while you're sleeping, and then we have 90-minute sleep cycles. It comes at the end of your sleep cycle. And it's responsible for dreaming, memory processing, and emotional regulation. And so we use the bilateral stimulation, which is crossing over each hemisphere of your brain, each side of your brain. And I happen to use a light bar, tappers, like buzzers on your hand, and headphones. And it's all synced up, and it's going back and forth. So it's activating your REM state. And essentially we can do a ton of things with it, but the two most common techniques that are used are desensitization and then reprocessing. And desensitization is incredibly interesting to see, and I think really powerful for some of our first responders, particularly related to critical incidents. And so we could take a critical incident with someone who is having a high intensity reaction to it. I always tell people, it's normal to have a reaction to a critical incident. People sometimes feel like they're not okay in a couple of days, but typically you'll start to feel like yourself within a week or two. And that's completely normal, however off their reaction feels like to them.
Right.
But let's say 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the road, they still feel like I'm having memories about this, or it's, I'm having an intrusive memory of it, or when I think about it, I am crying, or my heart is racing, or whatever it is. And I would call it a distress level, or we do in EMDR, we call it a distress level score. And so if someone has a high distress level feeling about the event, we can use EMDR to kick that intensity down. So if they come into my office at an 8, and that might mean they're crying, their heart's racing, they feel like they're in a near panic state while they talk about it or think about it, within like 45 minutes, at times, right? Not every single time, but it maybe in 45 minutes, they've been able to take that intensity level down to like a 1 or a 2.
Okay.
And so it creates, and we can talk more about it. I know we don't have a ton of time, but it creates enough emotional distance from the event, and I'll explain later how it happens. But people walk out feeling like I was an 8, and now I'm a 2, and every time I talk about it, I'm not crying, my heart's not racing, I'm not in a panic state, my body's relaxed. The second thing I'll say quickly about it is the reprocessing. So the desensitization is really good for just a one-time call. Even if we did it 50 times because you had 50 bad calls,
right,
we're just working on that call. We're staying, that's the target. But sometimes, and we can do it for all sorts of trauma, but let's stick to bad calls.
Okay.
Let's say somebody comes in, they have a bad call, and I urge you guys to listen for this language in people and refer them my way if you start to hear it, because I worry about people who have a bad call and then start to say things like, oh, that was a bad outcome, and I should have taken another firefighter with me. Then I would have had 2 hands, 2 people in the back of the truck with me.
Right.
Or, I wish I had done this, or that thing that I needed, wasn't in the right spot in the truck. It took me an extra 10 seconds, or I didn't drive the best route. Could I have gotten there fast? Whatever. Right. The second guessing, right? In some ways, when you hear that, I worry that they've got a negative narrative running about that call, and that they blame themselves. And that usually is comes with...
Where do I make my appointment then?
Well, to that point, I would say that's normal for everybody, right? You always, hopefully you guys always are reviewing to look at, like, how did that go? What went well? What didn't go well? And looking at, like, we could have done this better. That's totally normal.
Right.
But when it starts to impact your ability to function, where, like, you're consumed by this, right? It's showing up in your dreams. You can't shake it, right? That's when we can start to work on that sort of negative narrative. Because the truth is that when you peel the layers beneath all of it, is that the replacement thought of I should have done better is I did the best that I could with what I had at the time.
Right.
Right? I mean, nobody's intentionally going out there and being like, oh, I'm going to mess up this call and make someone have a bad outcome. No, right? Like, everybody's doing the best that they can with what they have.
Right.
And so we can use that same technique to have their brain create a new neural pathway that allows them to replace that belief system, which is, of course I did the best that I could with what I have.
And of course, if something had worked out differently, the outcome may have been different, but I still did everything I could with what I had.
Right. Yeah. So it's really creating a new neural pathway for them.
Yeah. So
obsessed with the EMDR. EMDR is the best.
Yeah.
I tell everyone in that moment, when you have that, or when you're on scene and there's 100 people talking and you can't think, I'll tell any of my interns and any of my students that I've had, listen to lung sounds.
Yes.
Always listen to lung sounds. I've already listened to lung sounds. I don't need to listen to lung sounds.
You're not listening to the lung sounds.
What I need is a really good stethoscope that blocks everybody out. And I usually, when I listen to lung sounds, I close my eyes so I can actually just focus. And all I need to do is block everybody out for 10, 15 seconds to give myself a second to reboot and start over.
That's a really good idea.
And that happens. It absolutely happens, because you do get caught up in things and you miss things when it happens. So in that moment, it's the best we got to work with.
Right. Because it's usually chaos in that kind of situation.
We should be teaching that as an actual strategy across the board for
I do.
FTOs.
I do.
Yeah.
Right. But you're doing it with your people and when you're teaching, but like literally every single student should learn that technique.
That and smile. I'm taking
Yes.
a picture should be.
Oh yes. That's my
Yes.
favorite.
Yes. Yes.
We gotta get a picture of your heart. Smile.
That's actually really good. I'll probably steal that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because everybody gets caught up in that second. It happens.
Yeah.
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 I know I have.
Yeah. Absolutely. Everybody does.
Anything to go away with? Anything to take away? Anything you want to send
You just
everybody
gave
away
us like
with?
the best piece
Besides
of wisdom. I mean,
that.
now you want more from him?
Yeah. I know.
Yeah. I say stay in contact with people and watch the people around you.
Yeah.
And I would much rather somebody be upset with me because I tried to wait and somebody go, you okay? My intern just last 2 shifts ago, we had a bad call and we run into the hospital and I was with another paramedic and we're getting, giving reports, a really high stress call. And I give my intern the iPad and go, hey, can you get it registered on the way? She did. She does an amazing job. And then she disappears and I can't find her. And I'm like, oh no, this was the one. It took a little bit to find her, and it turns out she had just eaten too much at dinner. I thought something had gotten to her, and she's like, no, we just overate, and I needed a minute.
You're right.
But
She's out there listening right now,
I'm
be like,
oh, no.
damn, Mike,
Yeah,
why are you telling people my stuff?
Absolutely. She's great. She's brand new. But I think she's going to do great. And in that moment, I was like, oh no.
Right.
And that's what she said. She said, I appreciate you thinking about that. But I'm good. But yeah, it's just one of those things. You have to pay attention to people around you because you don't want to have that. You don't want to walk around with that for years, where you're just like, well, yeah, maybe I should have handled that different. You know, and something would have turned out differently. So it's just one of those things. Pay attention.
I say that to the fire guys a lot because, and this goes for everyone, but fire has a better opportunity to spend time with their people because they're not quite as busy as you guys are. And there's a lot of them around at the same time. But the main point is that if you have the opportunity, like you're being paid to be on your shift for whatever it is, 12 hours, 24 hours, right? And you should spend as much time as you can with your partners because that is the way, if we care about mental health, right? If we care about each other doing well, and we know that the odds are stacked against us in this, right? So if we care about our colleagues, then getting to know them is the number one way to know when they're off. So
right.
if you're, and I say fire because it's just an easy example, but to make the point, it's like if everybody at the firehouse on downtime is hanging out in their bunk room by themselves, then they're not really, building that bond and they're not really getting to know each other. And so you're never going to know, oh, like Johnny's off today because XYZ, like whatever it is. So I always say, just spend that time.
Yeah. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before in our first episode, but the fire department and EMS is a little bit different. Yeah. EMS, I've, for years I've noticed I'm not one of these people, but, and there's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of times they'll get to the station, they do what they need to do, and then off to bunk. Yeah. Because we're very busy and get the rest when you can.
I get it.
And so they're not, out mingling. Sometimes you don't have that get to know, so it's a little bit more difficult for us. And that's unfortunate. But
and every station's different. And every culture is different because I talk to plenty of people who are like, I'm hanging out with the fire guys all the time, right? Like it just depends on what firehouse you're in.
Yeah.
But I still think that carving out some time, because I totally understand how busy you guys are. I still think like, let me give an hour, let me go hang out
important
for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I get to know everybody so that I know people when they're off.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we just don't know. We're never going to know the signs.
Yeah. Or you'll miss it.
Yeah. And then if something happens to them, people are going to sit back and be like, I wish I did that. It's like, spend some time with people.
Yep.
One of the stations I'm in now, we have 2 stations rotation right now for us. And the one station, they're like, it's dinner time. It doesn't matter if you're in on dinner. front and center. It's family. They call it family time.
Family
Sit
time.
down.
Right.
Yeah, you want to eat something different? Great. But it's everybody sits down and they're like, hey, you guys are part of us. Get in here.
Yeah.
We all
I like
down.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
we all sit down.
I love that.
And give each other grief. And there's,
Yeah.
sometimes terrible conversations that happen.
As there should be.
Of course.
Absolutely. Because it's family time.
That's right.
Like it or not,
Every
it's
That's
family
right.
out. And it's great because then, even when you're talking about stuff that has nothing pertains to work, but you notice when people are off.
Yeah.
When they're
Yeah.
not. It's a great time.
For 20 years here, but I've worked at several stations where it's family hour. And whether it was, like you said, whether you were in a dinner, but it was always, at some stations, it was after dinner out on the patio that, one or two of the guys would smoke a cigar or, whatever they would do. But we would all go
I'm
out
pretty sure
there.
you're not supposed to say that out loud.
This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But, whatever it was they would do, but everybody would go out there.
Yes.
And just, have nice time. And the station that I'm at now, I'm on a 12-hour truck, but I get to sit through all 3 shifts, so I get to know them all,
Right.
and they're amazing guys.
Yeah.
And it's nice because you get to know them all, and yeah. So I think that's also very important is to spend the time.
Yeah.
So. Listen, I think this was some great conversation today.
Agreed.
Mike, thanks for coming. And
Thanks,
please,
Mike.
if you want to come back anytime, just let us know.
But only if you think long and hard about who is going to play you in a movie. Otherwise, you're not allowed.
And it can't be somebody that's not here because apparently that's not a good one.
That's not acceptable either. All right. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Yeah, we'll catch you guys next time. Be safe.
And hopefully we got our EMDR person coming in soon.
I'm confident.
Good. Okay.
I'm confident she'll
All
be
right.
here.
Awesome.
If you see something, say something.
That's right.
All right, guys. We love you. Have a good night.
Bye.
This has been an Olive Pit production. We hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening.